Welcome to the... Is this the 20th?
This is the 20th.
Welcome to the 20th episode of Dialogika. I am Stephanie Tankelisan.
And I'm Swedian Lee. And I'm glad to be back.
Finally. After
Finally.
holding down the fort.
I'm done with American democracy for a while.
And Sweden's been really itching to get back into it and especially discuss... Well, this is a follow-up and an expansion of our previous episode where we talked about Chinese-Indonesian identities. But in this case, we're going to expand the idea more about what's going on in this country in terms of religious intolerance and the trend of politicizing Islam.
We're going to start from a little bit of a briefer on November 4th, the rally that happened against Ahok, and then the more recent December 2nd rally, which kind of sparked a bunch of different events, both in Jakarta and in other cities across the country, that showed where religious intolerance is growing and the implications of that to our young democracy.
So, here's to it.
So, in our last episode, Stephanie and Tika was talking about the November 4th rally, which was a large Muslim anti-Ahok rally that occupied the National Monument area of Jakarta and basically brought traffic to a standstill.
It was pretty much a lockdown in central parts of Jakarta. And if you were anywhere in Indonesia, I think you were definitely aware of the amount of people that's on the streets. It's, by any standards of any protest around the world, this is a very, very large protest. Over several 100,000 people, this kind of protests are enough to, if they really want to, destabilize the country, I think.
If the police force and the military forces that were guarding the areas that was deployed actually engaged with that many people, it would have been disastrous, right?
So following this, President Jokowi had an announcement where he decided to say he is not going to interfere in the case against Ahok and that the prosecution will go on as planned. Now, a month after this incident, it was followed up with the act of 2nd December. Again, a large group of people, several hundred thousands to reports say 1 million people showed up in order to guarantee that the police and the president took their protest seriously and that they were not going to arrest until they see Ahok behind bars. The difference is at this time, there was no major violence. Everything was really peaceful. I mean, the protesters called themselves Aksi Super Damai, or Super Peaceful Act. However, much of this has been attributed to the fact that President Jokowi too stood on the stage in Monas, the national monument, saying that, look, yes, we are going to have these procedures as scheduled, and we ask people their patience in order to see that the court proceedings will be done as it should.
A sea of protesters gathered around the national monument to vent their anger at Jakarta's governor known as Ahok. It's the biggest rally so far since the controversy involving the Christian governor began in September. That's when a video was circulated online, appearing to show Ahok criticizing his opponents, who argued the Quran prohibits Muslims from having a non-Muslim leader. Ahok is facing trial for blasphemy, which carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. Police named him a suspect after a mass rally early in November. But for these protesters, this is not enough.
In previous blasphemy cases, the suspects were always arrested. Why not this time?
An unprecedented show of force by Islamist and other Muslim groups in Indonesia, while the government has been trying hard to defend the country as a multi-religious pluralist nation. Looking at this rally, this could be harder and harder to defend. President Joko Widodos, who has said that political actors are behind the protest, made a surprise visit to the rally. Widodos is an ally of Ahok and urged for calm.
And actually, this is an interesting conversation, right? Jokowi did attend the December 2nd rally. He did attend as a practicing Muslim, as a devout Muslim. He attended the Friday prayer, which was led by Habibi Rizieq, who's the leader of FPI. So a lot of people have been back and forth whether or not his appearance, his presence, and his addressing the crowd in that way, was that a concession to the crowd's wishes, or was it something that was pragmatically smart on his part?
What do you think?
I personally think when I first heard about it, right, as I was following up with the events throughout the day.
Yeah.
When I saw that he was coming with Yusuf Kala and a couple of other ministers, I thought this is a very smart move. This is exactly what I think the masses want. Because part of what happened November 4th is that Jokowi didn't meet the masses. He was safely guarded somewhere, and the masses kind of revolted and started to like target the palace and things like that. So appearing in person was a great move. He kind of made it into a social media event with his like umbrella and the photos that accompanied it. Like, so I think it was a smart move to deal with that level of I don't want to say hysteria, but there was certainly tension, right? To deal with that in a very clever political way. But what do you think?
Whereas I feel like, you know, he's compromising with people who are threatening the democracy of this country and threatening the rule of law in this country and are vigilantes, right? Like, this is just giving them more grounds and legitimacy to continue what they do. I think at some point he has to take a hard line and say that, you know, vigilante actions and the mobocracy isn't right. Like, this is what I really appreciate in terms of, you know, Ridwan Kamil, who is the mayor of Bandung, who also faced intolerance in his city. And in that case, what happened there was like an Islamic group went into a church service in a public
building and shut it down.
and tried to shut it down. And in this case, he even, you know, stated that he wanted the government to reimburse the cost of the service that was, you know, canceled because of it. And he actually made clear statements that any kinds of intolerance was not going to be accepted in Bandung, and that this is against the foundation of our country. And I really appreciate he, you know, stood his ground on the fact that our country is founded on religious freedom, and any kinds of acts that promote intolerance shouldn't be tolerated. And I don't know, and I wish Jokowi and other political figures had a harder line against this. I think any time that FPI and other groups have been acting up, then they have a long history of this. The government has always been very silent about the violence perpetrated by them, and this allows them to makin merajalela, or get, you know, more emboldened by the actions and by their ability to do so, because there are no consequences for them. And if there's continually no consequences for them and what they think is legitimized by the president, then at what point
I guess
is he going to let this slide? I guess that's my problem.
Because they're
like, what would it take?
Because they're so conciliatory, right?
Yeah. And I think the main problem here is, I think there's this fear of, you know, decrying these kinds of movements because, you know, they are Islamic and is based on religious grounds. But at some point, they need to realize that if they're not going to do anything about it soon, it's just going to get worse and worse. And I'm not sure that this appeasing, I just feel like this is appeasement. You know, appeasement is the move that Great Britain did towards Hitler.
You don't want him to pull a Chamberlain.
You don't want him to pull a Chamberlain, exactly.
Sorry, we're like history geeks.
But yeah, I mean, at what point will it happen, right? Are you gonna wait until someone is dead, or I don't know. Like, I
feel like I totally agree with you in that this is a slippery slope and it's a dangerous game that they're playing, and a lot of political scientists have been saying that about Jokowi. But a part of me does have some sympathy, because I think part of the controversy around Ahok is also around leadership style, right? Like, he is not Javanese, he's from Bangka Belitung, and so he has a distinctly non-Javanese leadership style, which means that he's not the most polite person, and he doesn't try to like save face of the people he's targeting, or like the people he's opposing. So well, as opposed to Jokowi, who was the mayor of Solo.
He's from Solo, you know. He's like very well mannered.
He was very well mannered, and I think part of his approach with dealing with masses and leadership in general is about where can we find some common ground? Where can we mediate the situation rather than take a hard stance? And I think I have some sympathy for him, because
for sure.
Some of these people might react more badly to any kind of like hardline responses, even if they're justified from the government. Even if they're justified, they might not take well to it, and they would prefer at least some give and take. But again, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I think I'm just worried. I just want Jokowi to at some point be clear on what his slippery slope is. I think a lot of people have been really positive about what he's doing, and I understand that as a president, his priority is for the stability of the country right now. But I also do not think that what he's doing is giving him a show of strength. I think he's showing, if anything, how much he does not have things under his control right now. And I think they're going to take as much advantage of this as they can. And I think maybe that's just the cards that he's been given, and this is the way he has to play it.
Yeah.
So, just so you know who Habibi Rizieq, or as I like to call him, Habibi Rizieq, is he's basically Arab Indonesian who was born and raised in Indonesia but got his education in Saudi Arabia. He believes in wanting to implement Sharia Islam in all of Indonesia, so wanting Islamic law to be the law of Indonesia. And he's been for years and years and years and years involved in numerous acts of intimidation and violence towards minorities, especially Christian minorities in Indonesia. I wouldn't go so far as to say like he's involved in the bombings in Indonesia, but he's definitely a thug using religion as his main stick.
Well, yeah, he has a range of involvement, right?
He's been in prison several times under Megawati and President Yudhoyono's times for inciting hatred. So he's not exactly a poster boy of Islamic moderate. There are a lot of really cool and moderate and intellectual ulamas in Indonesia, like Qureshi Shihab, and he's definitely not one of them.
Yeah, I think, and the fact that he's leading a group that can rouse up a mob really quickly, right? That's the power of FPI right now. They literally, their mode of communication is, barging into communities and spaces and demanding everyone to listen to their demands.
Yeah, and often with police approval, or like, it's just so strange, right? Like, they're basically a vigilante organization trying to impose their morals on the rest of Indonesia. This act has been such a big step up to them organizationally, because prior to this, they usually, have 50 to 60 men going into wartegs or small restaurants during Ramadan and then, taking the food of the food sellers who are selling food during the fasting season. And now they have such this big platform. And you kind of ask why or how they've managed to grow this much under such a short period of time. And it's interesting to see this development, which is why I think a lot of political commentators do not think that this is purely his act or the act of the few. It's more that they're a big organization behind this with big sites beyond Ahok in the sense.
And I also think me coming back from being in America and seeing the results of how a populist mob can be led and in many ways misled by a charismatic figure. I see parallels with it with the way that Trump and other kinds of extremist rightist leaders across the world have been able to mobilize the masses. These are people who are charismatic. They have the ability to find what scares people and what intimidates them and use it to mobilize them in a way that's scary for any kind of democracy, especially one as large as Indonesia's.
I think the main thing here that you've been touching on is that, it doesn't really matter what religion is being used. I mean, Trump uses Christianity, Habibi Rizieq uses Islam. The common thread here is this idea of using populism and fear tactics, right? And in this case, I feel that what's interesting to see how they're playing the rhetorics of this Ahok trial is they're always saying this is aksi bela Islam or defending Islam. So there's kind of, in their side of the story that they're pitching to their followers is, Islam is under attack, and you need to defend it, otherwise you too are kafir or, infidel. And that's exactly what Trump did as well. He's basically saying, white Christian Americans are under attack, and you need to defend that from taking over, which is really strange to me as a double minority to see that people who are in the majority think that they're under attack, and see that, they need to defend their identity in a place where they are the majority.
Yeah.
And how, regardless of whether or not that makes statistical sense, it's still very effective. And it's really like, it's more like, are you serious right now? Like, that you guys are in the majority, right? And like, but I don't know. I think it's always that if you have always had this privilege, any kind of equality will make you feel oppressed.
What I'm seeing is a trend of using the one thing that I think is very hard for people to talk back against in this country, which is religion. Nobody wants to talk back against religion. So they use that almost as a cover to really like attack people on racial grounds, on class grounds, on ethnic grounds, as well as on religious grounds. But that's not the only thing. It's the cover so that all these other subliminal attacks can be implemented, and we can push extreme views on those topics alongside extremist religious views as well, because religion is this thing that we can't fight back against. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about how can we respond to growing intolerance. In my experience, right, and granted, this is not about religion, but in my experience, when I was in the States, like part of the conversation after the victory of Trump is like, all right, there is a culture of intimidation and a culture of othering from the Trump campaign and from Trump supporters. How do we break that down? And for a lot of people, the first method you need to do is to reach out to your moderate Trump supporters whose ideals and values have been co-opted by the fringe movement. So I'm thinking, is that possible in the scenario in Indonesia right now? Because there's certainly a lot of moderate Muslims who may not realize that their religion has been co-opted by a fringe group. Can we talk to them, and can we have a conversation so that they realize that no, moderate Islam can exist, should exist? That's what Indonesia is all about.
I think moderate Islam does exist and is a big part of the conversation. I mean, NU has been traditionally a very moderate Muslim organization who's called out against these kinds of actions. However, I don't know, I think there has not been any charismatic figure who is in the moderate Muslim front that is, the can be the standard bearer and the torch holder for this.
Do you think part of it as well is that it's harder, it's less sexy, I guess, or it's less
sexy to be like moderate.
Yeah, it's less does it sound less charismatic? Is it much easier to yell and shout and intimidate? Maybe it is. Maybe people are drawn to that kind of character, and maybe that's where the flaw and how we engage in dialogue is happening. Like, why
I don't know.
Why do we follow instead of talk? But I do agree with you. Organizations like Muhammadiyah and NU, which are the two largest Muslim organizations in Indonesia. They have a lot of influence. They've been very good about hitting back and criticizing these fringe groups and saying, like, this is not what Islam is about. This is not what this country should be going down the path of.
I think that there's a bandwagoning effect that's going on here. You know that this is growing, and now you know that there is a big silent majority that is now no longer silent and is willing to do what it takes to enforce their ideals in violent practice. I think beforehand, you used to see FPI and all of these different organizations as small thuggish bands of people trying to get to racketeer money, and now you know that they're serious and they have the organizational ability to actually effectively problematize the diversity and safety of people here. This is why I'm so hard on Jokowi, is if we don't have big role models on the national stage, decrying the fact that we need to stop the progression, this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. We'll see if his strategy of, I'm calling it appeasement, will be useful, or we'll have to make him do the hard choices much later on with greater costs.
The minute we start becoming something where only the one majority rules overall is, I think, as you say, the national concept of Indonesia disappears. It's gonna like, are we still the country that was founded under the terms of Pancasila and the Constitution? I don't think so.
Thank you so much for listening to us this week. We hope you kind of took away something from it. As always, music credits to Jazzart, Ryan Little, and Bro for Free.
And if you haven't followed us on YouTube, our latest channel, you should definitely follow us.
We're also still going to be on SoundCloud, but we want to highlight YouTube a bit more.
And also, it's a lot easier, I guess, to listen on YouTube than, say, like open up SoundCloud or, go into iTunes and download the podcast. So we're trying to make it easier for you guys to listen, to enjoy the episodes.
Yeah. And once again, we always really want feedback. So email us at dialogikapodcast@gmail.com or send us a Facebook message or comment on YouTube.
And as always, we'll have resources and links at our website, dialogika.id. And
thanks so much for listening.